I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we delve into the poignant reflections of David-Seth Kirshner in his book, Streams of Shattered Consciousness. It is a book that captures the raw emotions and intricate history of the first 50 days of the Israel-Hamas war, as experienced firsthand on his 50th birthday. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we thank viewers like you for supporting writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his wonderful book. David, thanks so much for being our guest today.
Well, my honor. Thank you for having me, Logan.
It's my pleasure. October 7th, 2023, the unthinkable happened, a massacre in Israel, and it coincided with an important day for you, your 50th birthday. Tell us what that experience was like.
Well, you have to first rewind 365 days and 49 years. October 6th, 1973, my mother is 2.5 weeks past her due date with me in her uterus. She's very uncomfortable. It's the holiest day in the Jewish year. It's Yom Kippur. And word trickles into the synagogue where she's sitting on a hardwooden pew that there was a surprise attack from Egypt and Syria upon Israel. This bothered her so that right in the synagogue, her water broke. And a few hours later, the early morning of October 7th, I was born.
Amazing. And then 50 years later.
50 years later, on what was supposed to be the 50th birthday. And ironically, it was exactly a year after my mother had died. And I finished my mourning of my mom that day, the 6th. And I was finishing that process and looking forward to this exhale and beginning that new chapter in my life. And I wake up expecting to get all of these flurry of 50th birthday emails. And instead, I got a note from a dear friend of mine saying that she's in Israel and she's locked in a bomb shelter. And it's more than bombs, that there are people out in the street and she's scared for her life and to pray for her. And immediately I turned on the news. I started reading the paper, and we didn't even have a taste, Logan, of how bad it was at that point.
Exactly. I say about this attack that Israel had its 9/11, and in many ways, it's more impactful than 9/11. And I'll say this, because of the 12 to 1,500 people that were murdered, that's a greater percentage of the population than the 3,000 people who died on 9/11. So for a small country to lose, more than 1,000 people in one day in an unprovoked attack is really mind-boggling and revolting.
It is. And I'm not a big fan, Logan, of comparing atrocities.
Right.
I would only say that for kids who are at a concert who were hunted down and killed ruthlessly, women who were brutally raped, children who were killed in front of their parents, and parents who were killed in front of their children, it's a level of barbarism that's almost unthinkable. It's beyond a deviant mind.
Yeah.
So this has wounded the psyche of the Israeli spirit. It is still bleeding very, very severely. I've been there 3 times since the war has broken out, and you can see its wounds everywhere you go. So I think that they'll be healing these wounds for at least a generation, if not more.
What brings you to Israel? Why would you travel to Israel during this very difficult time during a war?
Well, I told you that when I was born, it was connected to the Yom Kippur War, and all these years later, I am intrinsically connected to Israel and Zionism. I have spent my summers there for the last 14 years. We spend our time with our kids there, and any given year, I could go there between 3 and 6 times.
Wow. So
I decided to go when the war broke out, because if, God forbid, my brother were going through cancer or a sibling was in a car accident, the first thing I would do is jump on a plane and be by their side. And that's what Israel was going through. They were going through an unmitigated nightmare, and I needed to go there as a rabbi, as a Zionist, as a friend, someone who has many friends there, and let them know they're not alone. So that was very important for me to do. And I've since brought missions of both rabbis and lay people to go and to bear testimony and to give hugs, to give love, to remind people that we will rebuild nail by nail, brick by brick, and that we will be strong and we will survive this.
What's your reaction to some of the reactions in this country that seem anti-Semitic, that seem pro-Palestinian, that seem unaware of the atrocities that befell Israel on October 7th.
So I'm going to say something that's going to catch some of your listeners off guard, and that is I am a unwavering Zionist. I'm also pro-Palestinian. So those two things are not mutually exclusive. Where I think there is tremendous confusion, Logan, is people who are pro-Hamas and claim to be pro-Palestinian. That's like someone who's on Weight Watchers who only eats Ben and Jerry's. They just don't work together.
Right.
Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's known as a terrorist organization by all of the major and appreciated and respected Western civilizations and countries. What they did was terroristic, and we can't see this as a divide between the Palestinians and the Jews, or Palestinians and Israelis. This is a divide between good and evil, between right and wrong. If you remember, after 9/11, George W. Bush said, very simply, you're either with us or you're against us. And what he meant by that was, if you're in favor of the terrorists, if you're going to equivocate, if you're going to give reason for this, well, then you're against us. And if you are against what happened on 9/11, then you're with us. I think the same paradigm fits in on October 7th. How anyone could stand with the barbarism that happened is beyond me. And I think they're against civilized society and civilized world if they side with Hamas.
It's frightening that there are so many people, who do seem to side with Hamas, and even amongst our elected leaders. To me, it's shocking, it's revolting. It'd be like siding with Osama bin Laden. Because we have seen that type of evil. It's an awful evil. Let me talk about your book for a second. You write about the first 50 days. What have we learned in these first 50 days? And tell us about your focus when you focus on these first 50 days of the war.
Of course. So the first day happened, October 7th. It knocked the wind out of all of us, and I didn't know what to do with my emotions. I'm a rabbi of a congregation, and I felt it incumbent upon me. I felt the responsibility to channel all of these disparate emotions into some form of communication with my congregation, and I did just that. I also had the piece published in a well-known Israeli newspaper called the Times of Israel. The next day, I had a whole bunch more emotions, and I wrote those out, and I had those published as well, and then shared it with my congregation. And then the next day, I had even different emotions, and the next thing I knew, it just kept going, and it became bigger than me. And every day, I was writing a chronicle of emotions, reflections, a lot of historical points, ethical conundrums, and important challenges and realities that we needed to remember. And before I knew it, this became bigger than I was. And at about the 35th day, I decided I would turn this into more than just blogs. I decided to stop at 50, although there is an epilogue of the post 10 days of 60 days later. So the epilogue does include a synopsis of the last 10 days. And it really travels the journey, the arc of grief. What is it when we have grief? There is shock, there's anger, there's resentment, there's distrust, there's confusion, there's frustration, there's hope. And within each of the chapters, you'll find that in the book. You're also going to find a lot of history, a lot of reminders for people who only see through snapshots of time, who only see from 2022 to 2023 or from 2015 to 2023, and they forget what happened in 1947 or 1948 or 1956 or 1967 or 1973 or 1982 or 1985 or 1994 or 2000. And these are important historical landmarks in the history of Judaism, Zionism, and Israel. So making people aware of those things is important. I also try very hard to drive some analogies that I think people can appreciate and understand, because the Middle East is complex, and I want to make it accessible to as many people as possible.
Yeah, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I think putting out good information is very, very vital. It's a difficult situation for Israel in that they're fighting an enemy that shields itself with civilians. What's your takeaway on that? What should Israel do and the IDF do to eliminate the threat of Hamas yet protect as many civilians as possible. It's difficult when they're being used as human shields.
I would take it a layer further, Logan. It's also difficult when there at the one time was 250 Israeli hostages
Hmm.
held within the most densely populated strip in the world. What
Yeah.
do? You have to fight that war as if there are no hostages, and then you have to negotiate for the hostages as if there's no possibility of war.
Hmm.
That's a paradox that doesn't really add up well together. I think that that's really challenging. I think an ethical conundrum of a terrorist holding a baby that is shooting at you is not solvable. And I think that that terrorist question becomes even more complicated when they're holding a baby that's an Israeli baby that was held hostage and captured from within Israel and is in Gaza. I don't know how the soldier responds. Either way, it's a lose-lose for Israel in this scenario, which we knew was going to happen. In fact, on the first chapters I've written on the book, I predicted that within a matter of short time, between 10 and 12 days, the tide will turn and Israel will be in a lose-lose situation. Not saying I'm a soothsayer, but indeed that did happen. And I think some of these ethical conundrums are impossible to solve. And I think it only exacerbates the challenges that Israel's facing today.
There used to be one steadfast golden rule, and that was we don't negotiate with terrorists. We've had to negotiate with terrorists in this case to get some of the hostages released. But it's a dangerous precedent because we're telling the next Osama bin Laden now to come into the United States and not only kill 3,000 people, take 300 more and hold them hostage so you'll have leverage over the United States or Israel or whatever peace-loving democracy there is out there, don't you think?
I'm gonna answer your question with a story because I'm a rabbi and that's how I was trained.
Sure.
Um, we had spent our summers in Israel, and there was an Israeli soldier who was held captive for 5 years by Hamas. His name was Gilad Shalit. And
Mhm.
every Thursday night, there would be a protest in front of the prime minister's house. Gilad Shalit's parents would lead a protest demanding for his release. They had proof that he was alive, and they said at all costs, we should release at least 1,000 prisoners to get him back. Across the street from Gilad Shalit's parents were another group of protesters who said, my loved ones were killed by terrorists. I don't want these terrorists in jail, released for this one soldier as much as I want that one soldier home. And I had written about this years ago that I was literally in the middle of the road because I understood both sides of this.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, we gave back 1,000 prisoners, many with blood on their hands, for the release of Gilad Shalit. One of those prisoners was Yahya Sinwar, who was the leader and the architect of Hamas on October the 7th. So now looking back, was it a good move? Was it a bad move? Was it the right move? Was it the wrong move? I'm all in favor, personally, of doing anything and everything. Clear the prisons out, get them all home, bring every single Israeli back who's being held against their will right now in Gaza, and bring the bodies back because every family deserves to have a grave that they can visit their loved one. That's where I am. I do not believe in a ceasefire. I believe in a pause in fire to make that happen. If you want to release the prisoners, that's fine. That's because I believe that human living life and the ability for families to mourn the ones that have already been killed in a grave in Israel is an important Jewish value. It's an Israeli value. It's something we should champion and celebrate. However, it gives currency for this to happen again. And it is an ethical twist that I don't know how to get out of.
Yeah, exactly. It's an ethical twist that is a black hole once you go there. Negotiating with terrorists has to be a steadfast rule. And the human side of you says, well, if we could save this life, why not? Because down the road, the next time, and so on. It's a
I'll tell
hard
you
situation. Go ahead.
the other human side, sorry to interrupt you, Logan,
No.
is that God forbid that were my kid, that were my wife, that were my mom, that were my brother. I would do anything. I would give up any of my limbs to make sure they were brought back alive. So it's easy to be brave from a safe distance. But each time I was in Israel, I sat next to people whose loved ones are being held against their will. Mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters who are talking about their loved ones that they haven't seen in 75 days. And I could taste the salt of their tears as they spoke to us. So I understood the idea that anything was possible to bring them back. And I think that that's within reason, but it is a black hole. You're exactly right.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking. I've heard the mothers, I've seen the fathers on TV crying that they want their children back. Um, and it's heartbreaking. There's no other way about it. You know, these are young people at a music festival who are, like you said, hunted down and killed in the most barbaric ways and treated even worse. It's a horrible, horrible situation. We've seen despicable acts in this country where people have taken down the posters of the kidnapped people. This is something that every decent human being, no matter their race, color, creed, ethnic origin, should all stand behind, is protect those hostages and denounce the evil that befell Israel on October 7th. Rabbi, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Logan, it's my honor. Thank you.
Honor is mine, sir. To the folks at home, the name of the book is Streams of Shattered Consciousness. It's written by David-Seth Kirshner. He had an unbelievable birthday when he turned 50 on October 7th. He woke up to a nightmare unfolding in the state of Israel, and he has documented the war, the first 50 days of it at least, in this very, very powerful book. It's highly recommended. The links are below this interview. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.